Hey, I'm Pep, and this is a Pep Talk. Now today, we're going to talk about games you can play on the go. And not only are we going to talk about what games you can play on the go, we're going to talk about ways you can change your gameplay in order to make it so that you can play games on the go. But what does on the go mean? Well, I've divided it into 3 separate categories. One, you're maybe somewhere where you have a reasonable amount of table space, but you're kind of confined. Maybe you're even at a friend's house. They just don't have a lot of space. So I'm going to say anything that can fit onto a reasonable sized playing area. Not a lot, but if you think about like 2 airplane trays combined together, it's about this size. So that's going to be one section. The other section is going to be games that could fit on a much smaller area, such as maybe you're in a train and there's a tiny little table in between, or at an airport, or something like that. And that would be games that would fit onto something about the size of a clipboard. And the last section is quite easy, because it's simply games that will fit nowhere. Games you could play while walking, while standing, while at a party with 0 table space, whatever. And there's a surprising number of games I have that fit into that category. And before I even get into this, I'm going to preface this with, there's a lot of games that would fit this category, the idea that you could play them on the go, that I just don't own, and I'm not going to mention any of those games. But they definitely exist. Okay, let's just jump right in. So again, we're starting with a table about that size. So first things up, First things up are deck builders. So you've got your Star Realms, you've got Eternal, Chronicles of the Throne, you've got Epic, you've got, this pile's getting too big, Hero Realms, all these kind of games. Deck builders are generally the type of game that take up a small area, especially ones like these that don't have a board. These are usually pretty easy to set up on a table. Now the thing is, some of these will take up a little bit more space than that, but what you need to start being willing to do is collapsing things. If you have 2 or 3 different things in play that do something similar, you just kind of overlap them on top of each other so that you can still see the attack or defense or whatever is necessary. I should be placing these onto the table as I'm talking. Now, in my opinion, an important criteria for games that can actually be played on the go is they either need to not have a lot of tokens or things that could be lost, or those particular tokens need to be the kind that it's okay if they're covered up by other stuff, you know? So you could essentially put them in your pockets and it wouldn't really ruin the game. And in games like Star Realms, where you need to keep track of your life, well, if you don't have an easy way to do it, you could always just write it down on paper and keep track that way. It might take up less space than the card life version that the game comes with, although I doubt many people use that anyway. But so, of course, this means games like Potion Explosion, even though they technically would possibly fit on a table that big, you don't want to play with that. If one of those marbles falls, let's say you're on a plane, well, it's gone. You know, you're not likely to find it again. It could roll into infinity. You know, if you're playing it somewhere where it's really messy and you don't have a lot of table space, again, you probably don't want to pull something like that out. If you lose it, you might never find it again. Even games like Onitama, well, you could play it on a space this big, fairly easily, in fact. But the thing is, it has pieces. It has little topply pieces that can fall over and possibly get lost. So this is a maybe, but personally, I would say no. I think it doesn't fall into the line of what I'm talking about. However, something like Battle Line does, because the entire thing set up would take up about that much space. However, if you have a combined space, like 2 different trays, you could probably still set it up. It would be a little bit wonky. But again, this is where you need to be willing to overlap things. If you don't mind things overlapping and you can kind of keep track of it without it getting too messy, this is fine. Because cards are flat on a surface, they're not really as much at risk of, you know, toppling over and getting lost. Someone might still knock them over, but that's the same kind of risk you have playing at home. So it doesn't really have tokens or anything. It's mostly card play, and so it works on a surface, you know, about that size. Now, next up on the list, I have code names. And people know code names. Code names is great. There's lots of different versions of code names. Thing is, it does take up a big amount of table and probably about the size of table that we're using. But there are ways that you can reduce the amount of size needed for something like this down to the smaller table. And that is by taking a picture of a board ahead of time. Have a bunch of words laid out, take a picture, and just send that picture ahead of time to everybody on their phone or whatever, and that's the one you'll use. Take 5 or 6 of those pictures of different setups of words, and boom, all you need are the rest of the components, and you'll be fine. The nice part about something like this is that you're playing with a group that aren't necessarily together either. Maybe you're in separate sections of the plane. You may still be able to play via your phone. Now, that does bring up an interesting point, and that is, well, every game is technically something you can play on the go if you have an app version of it. So that's true. You want to play, not Twilight Imperium, that doesn't have an app. Twilight Struggle. Oh, yeah. This thing is a massive setup. There's no way it would fit on that table that I had. But this would definitely fit on your phone. And there is an app for this. So if you want to use apps, that's definitely always a great way to make something like this work. But I'm not talking about those today. I'm talking about board games. Well, an app version of a board game is still a board game. Anyway, next up is Push. If you've never played this before, it's a quick little interesting colored number game. I don't want to explain the whole thing. But it does take up a little bit of space, so it probably needs a table about that size. However, something else that you can do with a lot of these type of games is hold the cards separately. So you have the cards that you've collected, for example, you could be putting those into your pocket. You could be keeping them in one hand the entire game, whatever hand you're not using for card flipping and all that. And then you could play this on a much smaller table, assuming everyone is willing to hold the cards in their hand. Now, it's a little more inconvenient, but it's a way that you can play a game that should take a larger table space on a smaller one. The same kind of thing could be done for a game like Hocus. Hocus, if you've never played, it's basically like poker with special roles and abilities, and it's very different, but if you've played poker, probably have the same kind of feel. As you can imagine, playing something like poker, you do need a bit of a table for it. You can't really play in midair, you gotta bet money and stuff like that. But in this one, most of the betting is done via cards. So those cards would need to be on, a fairly large size table like the one that I had there. Could you fit on the smaller one? Possibly, but you'd really need to start collapsing things, and people again would have to keep their hands and the pockets that they're building in their, I suppose, actual pockets. You could put your pockets in your pockets, which is kind of funny. Anyways, I only have one more here, and maybe it's a bit of a lesser known game, but Draco Magi. Magi? Draco Magi. I played this last night, so it reminded me of how much I enjoyed this game, and it takes up a reasonable amount of table, but as with most of the other games I've mentioned, as long as you're willing to have some of the other cards somewhere else. Your dragon deck could technically be in a pocket, your attack deck or whatever could also be in a pocket. The discard piles could be in other pockets. Really, you just need to game with cargo pants on. That's the solution. I mean, I like cargo pants and cargo shorts. But so that's what I got for the larger table. Now we're moving down to the smaller table. As a reminder, that's about a table this size. You don't have a lot of room here. And I did mention some of these games could be played on this table. It'd just be a little rough. And while we're on the topic of games that could be done on either table, I'm going to do a few that probably should have been on bigger tables, but I think based on some of the stuff I said earlier, it wouldn't be too hard to get them onto larger ones, or smaller ones. First up, Sheriff of Nottingham. And if you played this game and had it set up on a table, yeah, it does take up a reasonable amount of space. But listen, the player boards that you have are basically meaningless. You don't need them. The little deck of cards in the middle, that's the only thing that really needs to be there, and that could easily be set on the tray. The rest of the stuff can happen in your hands, and again, the points you've already gotten can be put in your pockets. Now, in order to do it that way, you really need people to accept that you're not going to be able to know what everyone has at all times. Like, how many chickens do you have? You might just have to ask and have people check. Or just play it on a larger table and all that stuff can still be there because, again, you don't really need those player boards. I do suggest either way, though, that you keep your money in your pockets, which is ironic since the first player is whoever has the most money in their pockets. So if you are the person who brought the game, it's probably going to be you because you have all the game's money in your pockets. And now we've got another one, and definitely one of my favorites, and that is Blockus. Now, the thing is, can Blockus fit onto that small table? Well, let's find out. Look at that. It like perfectly fits. That's probably really loud. But that's pretty tight, and there's no room for all the little pieces. You could put the little pieces in your pocket, but then you really have to sift through them in order to find them. So this would probably want to be played on a bigger table. And you know what, on top of that, that's a lot of loose pieces if you're playing on a big table. So it's basically play this on a small table with the pieces on your pockets, or don't play it. So I'm actually even just going to call that a maybe. That could have been much worse. Now, a similar type of game to Codenames is something like Crosstalk. Now, the nice part about Crosstalk is that it does fit onto a very small table. There's not a lot of stuff that needs to be kind of left out in the open. There's very little. But you would, again, have to have players hold on to some things, but most of it can be done fairly easily. And most of this can be done without people having to like be in the exact same area. You can have a bit of space between people and pass things around if you need to. And so that makes it a good game for a small area. Modern art is perhaps another one of the examples of it probably should be on a bigger table to really make sure everything's out in the open and visible at all times, but you can very easily play it on the small table. There's a small board that you need to show how much each particular artist's art is worth, but you can keep track of that on paper if you really needed to, and most of your cards can be in your hand, and the paintings that you've won can be in your pockets. That's where it gets a little tricky though, because the paintings that you've won are what trigger the end of the game, so you probably don't want to have those hidden. So this is likely more on the bigger side, but if you want to get creative with it, you could probably fit it on the smaller one. I think this is the first box that I actually feel comfortable I could probably do a box flip with. Yeah! Anyway, next up is Pentago. If you've never seen this game before, it's really interesting. The thing is, it all takes place on a little board, and the pieces actually fall and sink in, so you don't really have to worry about the pieces getting knocked around too much. On top of that, the board spins, but it's all leveled in and attached to it, so it's all very sturdy, so you can very easily bring this. It's basically like Connect 4, but it's Connect 5, and quarters of the board spin, so you have to think about whether or not someone could win based on spinning. Anyway, it is very easy to play in a small area. Again, especially if you're willing to keep things in your pockets. That's upside down. Let's try to get away from the pockets though. On our next one, Dixit. Now the thing about Dixit is the only real space it needs to take up is the space where you lay out the cards, however many people are playing the cards that they've played. The score track part isn't really necessary. Again, you could keep track of that on paper. So if you're playing in an unstable area and you don't want to lose your bunnies, well, just keep track on paper. But everyone's hands are just in their hands anyway, so this can easily be played in a smaller area than you might normally. And you don't even have to worry about your pockets. Oh gosh, that one's heavy. Almost rolled out of my hand. Now on the topic of rolling, roll and writes are pretty easy to play on a small area. A lot of them you can kind of keep the notepads in your hand. I have a couple of roll and writes here. There's lots of roll and writes. Most of them have about the same amount of table space. You might want to have a bigger table depending on them. Some of them can be played on the smaller table. The only thing you really need to worry about is rolling the dice. And I have an idea for that. So rather than continue with this one, we are going to move on. Oh, this is going to be a disaster. And I'm going to talk about role-playing. Now, I know you're on an airplane or wherever, and you probably don't want to sit there role-playing, doing Dungeons and Dragons, but hey, whatever. Maybe you're open to it. Maybe what you're doing is you're actually on like a road trip in a car, or you're just somewhere where there isn't any table space. Well, there's no reason that you couldn't play something like Dungeons and Dragons or Starfinder or insert role-playing game of your choice. Now, if you're really experienced, you probably don't even need to have the books with you. You can probably just do everything on the fly. There is no way that these books are going to get stacked on here. Let's do it this way. Oh gosh, oh gosh. Now, you need a little bit of table space, probably. I would suggest having your characters on your phones, which a lot of people do anyway. They have a phone or an iPad and they keep their character on there. And of course, a lot of people would think, well, what about the grid? You know, we're encountering something. Well, a lot of people already play this way, but a good way to play role-playing games is theater of the mind. The DM tells you where things are and where you are on the map and where everything is kind of positioned. You just kind of wing it. It's more like a storyboard rather than a physical board, which is nice because you just have to ask, can I reach the goblin this turn? The DM would say, no, you're a little bit off, or they'd say, yeah, you can make it, rather than having to actually, count out and math things. Sometimes it makes it quite a bit quicker. But listen, I promised you a solution to those roll and write games. Well, I have one. See, you probably think when it comes to rolling dice, you need a little bit of a table area, or heck, maybe you just want to use a dice roller. Well, dice roller doesn't really work for stuff like a roll and write. They often have different dice, some of them have different symbols, sometimes they're numbers, sometimes they're different colors, whatever. But whether you're playing a roll and write or Dungeons & Dragons, I have a solution for you. Pretty much every set of dice comes in a little container like this. So what you want to do is take whatever dice you want to roll. Let's say it's a D6. You put it here in this and you shake it and hold it flat. I rolled a 6. I rolled a 3. It's very easy. On top of that, you can throw an extra die in, so you want to roll your attack and get the damage at the same time. Okay, I rolled an 18 and I did 3 damage. I'm holding it here like you can see it, and clearly you can't, but I'll show a close-up example. It works quite well. In fact, you can even kind of tilt, and it's stable enough to show other people what you've rolled. And I mean, if you're worried about cheating and whatnot, because they're in the little glass, it's actually kind of hard to readjust them. I mean, you could try to shake the die over. I made my roll worse. Nice. But this kind of solution works for pretty much any game that needs die rolls. You probably need a slightly bigger glass, but you can get dice that come in a little bit bigger of a one for games that roll 3 or 4 D6s at the same time. But it works kind of like Boggle did whenever we were kids. Although I suppose adults can play Boggle too, but none of us do. Now I'm just going to power through a couple of games here because it's getting a little longer than expected. So, you got a small little table. What are some things you could play? Well, push your luck style games like Dead Man's Draw. That could definitely work. Okay, okay. I'm playing Jenga with these too. Something like Custom Heroes. Again, could be played on a bigger table, but most of it's just card play. There's some tokens, but those can just be held in your pockets. Not a big deal. Stick that there. Mastermind. Oh, that's loud. I mean, Mastermind is an interesting one because if you have a really good memory, you could technically play this with no table. Just have the clue in your head or like write it down and then have people guess. And I mean, 2 little sheets of paper in your hands, you could just keep writing down what didn't work. You could easily play this without. Not that I'm suggesting that you don't buy the game because, buy games. But, you could play this one with no table space if it was really required. Coup? Coup's an easy one. Doesn't take up a lot of table space. Again, there's coins and whatnot. Keep them in your pockets, although might be a good idea to keep them in an open hand or something because how many coins you have in Coup is important. But you have a little bit of table space, you can keep your coins there. Next up, Jaipur. Jaipur doesn't take up a lot of table space. You could pretty easily fit it on the little table that I have. But you probably want to stack some things up that wouldn't normally get stacked. And again, you might want to hold some stuff in your hand, like any of the cards that you've earned and the stuff that you've already cashed in or whatever. But other than that, this one will work just fine. Oh gosh. Medium is an interesting one. If you haven't played Medium yet, highly suggest checking it out. But it's something that doesn't take up a lot of table space. Assuming you're okay with holding most of the tokens in your pockets and whatnot, and somebody's willing to hold the deck, you could almost play this with no table. Most of it is just playing cards or like showing that you're playing a card and the wordplay associated with it. And next up we have the Astute Goose. Something had to fall eventually, but it didn't even fall from the stuff I was stacking. This is a fun little one. Doesn't take up a lot of table space. It's mostly about memorizing and whatnot, so yeah, anything you earn, you can put in your pockets. This is very easy, takes up very little table space. That's not happening. These two are a little bit more debatable. Tides of Time can take up a little bit more table space. Again, if you're willing to kind of collapse your stuff and be able to show what symbols things have, this could easily be played on a fairly small space. And Timeline is another example. It could take up a lot of space, but if you're willing to collapse instead of keeping big spaces between things, then it should be fine. If you're worried about having spaces in between things, perhaps form it into more of a wheel rather than a straight line. And then the gaps in between are where you would try to slide new cards and then just extend those gaps. I think that would work. That sounds reasonable enough. And the last one in this pile, well, that's not actually true because some fell. Dungeon Roll. If you've never played Dungeon Roll, any of the tokens actually just stay in this little chest, which is nice. You do have some dice to roll, but using the little method I talked about earlier, you could roll the dice that way. And most of this would only really need to be played on a pretty small table. You can even play this game by yourself if you're just on a plane and want to roll some dice and explore a dungeon. Now the ones that fell are a specific type of game, and that is the escape room games. A lot of these don't require all that much table space. They do for the parts where you need to kind of lay things out and if you want multiple people to work on it at once. But again, let's say you're on an airplane, if you have all of you across the row kind of thing, you could be trying to solve this. And the neat part is there's kind of a timer on these. So if you're planning on taking a flight anyway, and the flight is about an hour and a half, well, you're usually supposed to finish this in an hour. So bring these, and it's a perfect game in order to fit in that time. This one here even has a picture of a plane on it, so that's perfect. This one is a boat. Maybe you're on a boat. Oh gosh, what have I gotten into here? We'll just do that. Oh, that's... Okay, now we've gotten into my favorite category, and that's games you can just play. It doesn't matter whether you have a table or not. You're standing, maybe you're even walking. Some of these I have played while going for a walk. So let's dig into these. I do want to have an honorable mention back to Dungeons & Dragons and Starfinder. Again, if everyone has their character on their phone, is willing to roll a dice into the little cups kind of thing, and also knows the rules well enough that you don't need to constantly refer back to the rules, you could easily play this while going for a walk down the trail. You want to do like a nice day of hiking, do it and play Dungeons & Dragons at the same time. I suppose at that point you could just be LARPing. You could also LARP, but you could also do it on a road trip or while you're traveling on a long train ride, whatever. But here's some other games you can do that with. Happy Salmon. You don't really need a table for Happy Salmon. In fact, it's more likely that you'll play it standing up in a circle. This game is literally designed for this, so it almost feels like cheating bringing it up, but it's a heck of a lot of fun. Now, of course, if you're stuck somewhere like on a train or a plane, odds are you can't really do this one, so this is more for the walking or just in an area that doesn't have any tables. Okay, next up are trivia style games. I have quite a few of them here, so really you can play these anywhere. You just have to bring the stack of trivia cards with you. And if you need to keep score or something, you can keep it on paper or people can keep the cards that they've earned in their pockets, whatever. The point is, again, you can play this on a plane, train, while walking, standing, anything, assuming people are wearing some cargo pants. So I'm just going to fire through them really quick. We've got a question of scruples. That's gonna go. Oh, that's not gonna go there. We've got. Time's up. I couldn't find the front. Oh, my time's almost up. We've got Quizniak. I really like this one. If you've never played, I'm just going to give you an example right now because it's so simple. Okay, so you pull out a card and you just start reading questions until people can figure out what the answer is. And they progressively get easier and easier. So, for example, and just if you think you know what it is, just kind of shout it out and maybe leave in the comments that you got it. So, number 10. It started as a research project at Stanford University. Number 9. Its name was a spelling mistake by the original founders. Number 8. Its head office has the largest corporate solar panel installation in the US. Number 7. It has a presence in over 88 countries. Now, as an example, let's just say that you had got it at this point, you would get 7 points. Depending on how by the rules you want to go, you'll lose points if you make incorrect guesses as well. I believe it's 5 every time you make a wrong guess. So you really don't want to make a wrong guess more than maybe once. Anyway, I'll keep going in case you didn't get it yet. Number 6, its name is a mathematical term followed by 100 zeros. Probably got it off that. Number 5, it employed almost 16,000 people at the end of 2007. Number 4, it has the largest network of translators in the world. Number 3, it receives about 1 billion requests each day. Number 2, it is the most visited website. And number 1, it is the largest search engine in the world. The answer, of course, is Ask Jeeves. No, it's Google. That was an interesting random example. But yeah, games like that are so easy to do. In fact, I just did it. I just played the game with you with no table. I mean, I was holding the box in my hand, but I mean, I'm sure you'll find people who are willing to hold a box of cards in their hand at some point. The last one of my trivia examples is speedy recall. You're essentially flipping over a letter and a word at the same time, and people have to think of a thing that matches that particular letter. So, as an example, this would be much easier if I had pre-prepared this. But I would go like, Haba, European city that starts with A. Or hardware store item that starts with A, because I don't want to get a new letter. And then whoever gets it first gets the clue, and then you move on. You do another word, another letter, etc. But it would be very easy to just hold this in your hand, and the people who score the points can just hold those in their pockets. I think I've emphasized the stacking part of this way too much now. One of my favorite social games to play is Werewolf. Now, you might have different versions of the same kind of game that are also like Werewolf. Not the one night version, though. Because it uses a lot of token and cards moving around and whatnot, you probably can't play this without a table, but you might be able to play it off with a smaller table like we talked about before. But the thing about Werewolf is you can easily play this with absolutely no table. All you have to do is give everyone a card. And because there's so many different kinds of roles in the game, you might have roles that matter about seating and whatnot. Just don't use those particular roles if you're playing while walking, for example. But if you're just all playing around a campfire, of course, you can just use those roles. If you're playing on a plane where people aren't next to each other, again, you probably wouldn't be able to use those roles. And you probably wouldn't want to use any roles that include a lot of like shouting or something. I don't know. The point is, you could easily just be on the beach with a dozen people and pull this out and play it around the campfire while everyone's eating marshmallows. Heck, if you have a really big group that's out, like a hiking party of 20 people, at the start of the hike, you can give everybody rolls and everyone just keeps the roll in their pocket. And then it turns into this like day-long excursion as you're going through the mountain hiking. I told you it would happen eventually. I think it's because I'm bouncing. Well, now I got more space for other games. Another one of my favorites is the Mind. And I love this as an example because I actually played this with a friend of mine when we were out going for a walk. I didn't even tell him I was planning on bringing it. We just got 2 or 3K down the trail and I pulled it in my pocket and I said, let's play. Now you're probably thinking, you know, there's some card play going on. How do you pull something like that off without having a table? Well, the thing is, you each have 2 hands. And if you're not doing anything else, like you're walking, you're gonna have the ability to use your hands for stuff. So one of my hands had my cards in it. And then the other hand had just like the leftover deck in it. And so whenever someone played a card, you just, put it on top of the deck. And then you play yours on top of the deck. It makes it a little bit harder in order to kind of like slowly put things in and whatnot. But you could still play with 3 or 4 players. You just have to make sure people are walking in a way that they can't see each other's hands. And of course, you could easily do this with no table if you're in a circle or if you're on a plane or a train or whatever. A tip for a lot of games like these is that you can use the box lids. So if you need to have a space to put cards whenever you've played them, just have someone hold the box lid and then the cards that are played can go into the box lid. And I think we only dropped 1 card the entire time we were doing it, so we did pretty well. As for how far we got into it, we didn't do so well. We Need a little bit more practice at it, I'd say. The other game we played while we were on that walk was No Thanks. If you've never played this before, you're essentially flipping over a card. Let's say it's an 18, and then everyone's going in turn order saying no thanks and putting a chip on it if they don't want to take the card. Eventually, someone might want to take the card though. But it's kind of like golf. You want to have the lowest score at the end, so if you grabbed like a 17, well, you just got 17 points. But the little chips each count as -1 point. So if it has 8 chips on it whenever you pick it up, you're technically only losing 9? Did I just do bad math? Anyway, plus you have more chips than everyone else, so it gives you a little bit more bidding power later. Plus, if you get 2 cards that are like next to each other, they collapse and they just count as whatever the lower number is. So if later you were to get an entire run, you just had like 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, really, you only have 16 points. And you might have got some chips as you're picking those up, so you might have actually lost points. But yeah, we were able to play this. Mind you, the game does come with some tokens, and we did drop the tokens quite a bit, but again, keep them in your pocket. It's usually not too difficult, and have someone with the lid so you can play stuff into the lid whenever needed. That's where we played the no thanks coins. Like the card would be in the lid, and then we just keep putting the no thanks coins on top of that. Just wanted to make sure people didn't think we were like throwing the coins at each other or like trying to stack the coins on one card. No, we were using the lid, so it really wasn't all that difficult. Now listen, I do not like Cards Against Humanity, but it is weird to talk about games you can play without a table and not mention one of the more popular games that exists. So if you do play this and you enjoy it, well, you can play this anywhere. You can play it while you're walking. Again, just be willing to have pockets full of cards. And I'm just going to mention it now because I've mentioned pockets full of cards so many times. Maybe this isn't obvious, but you should probably have your cards in sleeves if you're going to do the pocket card version. On top of that, you might even want to have your cards in top loaders, which are like the thick plastic things that you use for like really valuable cards in collectible card games. If you have cards in those, like if you're doing Werewolf, for example, you'd never have to worry about the cards getting bent and whatnot. So if you're planning on playing something like this as you're walking, you probably want to have it in at least regular sleeves, or maybe because it's not really that great of a game, you don't mind it getting destroyed. But either way, very easy to play while walking, and there's lots of versions of the game like What Do You Meme that are basically the exact same game. Any of those kind of games are generally very easy to do while walking. Oh, I just realized I'm supposed to be putting these onto the pile of doom. Oh gosh. This is all bad. Okay, it's almost done. I don't have to worry about it much longer. Okay, next up is A Fake Artist Goes to New York. Very cool little game in a very small box. Very easy to just fit this into a pocket. On top of that, all you're really doing is passing around a little notepad and writing on it with a pen. Super easy to do while walking, super easy to do without a table. Yeah, the only thing you probably shouldn't do is do it where people aren't relatively close to each other. Like you could pass it back down the line if you have a bunch of people on a plane or something, but eventually you have to kind of confer and try to guess who the fake artist is. So you want to have people relatively together for that, but yeah, that's very easy to play with little to no table. And probably one of the most obvious ones is any form of a charade style game. Speechless is the one I happen to have and really enjoy. And you do have little like things that you need to mark on to keep track of score and whatnot, but those are very easy to just kind of hold in your lap or whatever. And the little things that you guess on, you just hold them in your hands and write. You're even using markers that you can keep in your pocket. Very easy. The only part that's a little difficult is you have the 3 different types of cards, and normally you use the box in order to kind of keep those cards where you can see them. Of course, the solution is to just have the 3 piles, keep them in someone's pocket, or in a smaller box that you just kind of pass around, or, as I suggested when it came to code names, take pictures of groups of clues and send those pictures to people, or whatnot. And you could even make the group and make like 100 groups and then roll a D100 in order to see which one is the one that you're going to be guessing with. Whatever you want to do, it's pretty easy to do, and if you really do need to play with the cards in the box, you could do it on a very small table. And listen, I know it's weird that I had a lot of stuff falling over, and there's kind of a reason for it. The reason I was stacking things is to show that, you know, if you're riding on a train or a plane, this is the main reason why you can't really play a lot of dexterity games or things that have excessive tokens. Even if you had a worker placement game that would fit on one of those smaller boards, the problem is there's a lot of resources. If they're supposed to have workers and things that are stuck on spaces, the second the table gets bumped or the plane shakes or whatever, those things could tumble over, they could spill onto the floor, they could just go into different spaces than where they should be, and then you just have no idea where they're supposed to be. When you're playing on ground that isn't stable, you really have to be careful, because not everyone can catch things when they fall. Sometimes you drop them. I didn't actually want to drop it, I like this one. I should preface that I like the other ones that fell too. Most of them. Where did Cards Against Humanity go? Oh! Well, that's been my pep talk. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments about any of these games, assuming they survive that fall, let me know and I'll probably answer them in the comments section. What I'd really love to hear though is if you have any games that you play that I haven't mentioned that would also fit these criteria of playing on a small table or a really small table or an infinitely small table, that meaning no table at all. I'd love to hear some other suggestions, not only so other people can see them, but so that I have some ideas, because I like to go on long walks and camping and all that kind of stuff. So it'd be neat to see what kind of games I can play that I really don't need anything for. It'd be great to see some other ways you have of modifying things, like the little dice thing. Like, do you have any ideas? Oh, ow! That's why it's a bad idea. Like, to have tokens and dice and anything in general, dropping things, especially depending on where you are. Like I talked about hiking. Well, maybe you're hiking up Mount Everest or something. Well, if you happen to roll your favorite die and it slips out and falls down the mountain, sorry, you're never going to find it again. Although, in my personal opinion, if you're climbing Mount Everest, maybe enjoy it. And focus on survival, because apparently that's a big deal when you're climbing Mount Everest. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as always, live free, game hard, but not too hard. Like, don't break your board games like I just did. Game excessively, but gently. Game gently just doesn't have the same ring to it. All right, I got a lot to clean up. See you later.